بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله نشهد أن لا إله إلا الله نشهد أن محمد رسول الله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Of course, we begin by praising Allah, the most glorious, the most honorable, the most merciful. We testify to His oneness and greatness, and we testify to the prophethood of His most beloved Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, alaikum everybody again. We really appreciate all the people that register for this, everybody that's in this webinar with us. This is a super important time, I think, for us as a country. It's definitely an important time for us as a Muslim community, and particularly community leaders, organizers within nonprofits in the Muslim community. So really appreciate everybody being with us. Your brother Rami Kawas. I'm the executive director of Oaktree Institute. We're an organization dedicated to leadership and organizational development for the nonprofits in the Muslim space, in the Muslim community. Alhamdulillah, we've worked with hundreds of different organizations, from on-campus organizations, MSAs, to community centers, youth centers, to Islamic schools, and a whole bunch of different organizations, everything in the middle. Those that are serving our community, those are really working hard day in and day out to serve the Muslim community and the greater American community through the nonprofit institutions that we have. And alhamdulillah, we try to, as much as we can, focus all our trainings on how to make these organizations better. How do we as leaders, how do we as organizations, we get better at trying to do what it is that we're responsible for doing in our community. And this webinar was really important. I think we wanted to do it right, and we wanted to do it well. I think it's a super crucial issue at any time. Like the past, my work with organizations and leaders over the past, decade or so, I've seen these issues come up a lot, and they're super important for us to address. But particularly in the time that we're going through these really historic times, where we're going through a historic time with a pandemic, but one of the biggest pandemics that we have, or epidemics that we have in our country, is racism, and the systematic racism and its manifestations in many, many different forms throughout all the entities of our society. And inshallah today, what we want to do is equip community leaders, nonprofit leaders, organizers. We want to equip organizations with the awareness and the strategies on how to manage the impacts of bias and racism that manifest in our organizations and in the greater Muslim community and greater society. And at the same time, we want to understand how to be allies, how to be inclusive and create organizational practices as leaders and institutions, and how to be allies for the greater Black community and the greater Black movement that's going on, or the movement, the Black rights, the Black Lives Matter movement, or any of the greater social justice movements that are going on in our society. We want to understand how we as leaders and organizations should be allies given our climate today. I'll start by introducing my esteemed panelists, a wonderful group of panelists that we're very honored and happy to have. The first of them, I'll introduce each one of them, and I'll have them say a little bit, kind of a hello and a little bit for us. So the first one of them is Ndidi Okakpu. She is a consultant in our community, in community development and social enterprise. Mashallah, she has an extensive background in consulting for businesses, nonprofit organizations, community organizing. She's led delegations with the White House Office of Public Engagement, working on issues that affect marginalized communities in America. She's worked with a plethora of different politicians, including Keith Ellison, who just happens to be in the spotlight today. She's done tremendous amounts of work in the social justice and activism work, as well as the consulting work around the topics of allyship, particularly for marginalized communities. She holds a degree in business administration and finance from DePaul University, done a tremendous amount of work in the Chicago area. We're very happy to have you with us, Sister Ndidi. You can just give us assalamu alaikum. How are you doing?
Assalamu alaikum. Alhamdulillah. Glad to be here, and really glad that the space is being held. I think these are important conversations to be had. And as you eloquently pointed out, Rami, not just in this moment, but historically, they've been needed to be had. There are changes that need to be made. There's no time like the present. Alhamdulillah.
Absolutely. May Allah bless you. Jazakallah khair for being with us. Our second esteemed guest and been a very, very good mentor of mine, a friend, acquaintance for a long time, Sister Ismahan Abdullahi. She's the director of PACE, Public Affairs and Civic Engagements Department for the Muslim American Society National. She's been a long life community organizer, speaker, activist. Of course, she's done a tremendous amount of work in the San Diego community in particular, and alhamdulillah, much more on a national scene now, strengthening the Muslim community, the refugee community, the Black community, and the intersectionality of them all. She's been a leader on many, many different organizations locally and nationally. She's doing a tremendous amount of work, particularly, as I mentioned, in the San Diego area, developing leaders in the Muslim community, young leaders, Black leaders, refugee leaders, and mashallah, we're very, very happy to have her on for us with us today. I hope, thank you for joining us, Ismahan.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Jazakumullah khairan, Brother Rami. SubhanAllah. Very, very blessed to know you and your family for a very long time. May Allah bless you and continue to bless you. And it's such an honor for me to be here and just hold that space. And as my dear sister said, these conversations definitely need to be had.
Absolutely, barakallah fiki. And our last, Muhammad is not really a guest. He's a pillar of Oaktree. But of course, if you don't know, Mohammad Hasan is one of our instructors at Oaktree Institute. He's a licensed psychotherapist. He's an executive and communications coach and a consultant for a variety of different spaces, e-commerce, healthcare, but of course a nonprofit as well. He does a lot of our trainings around personal development, leadership, organizational trainings around whether it's culture or management or communication. And he currently serves as the executive director of an outpatient mental health clinic. Muhammad has a master's degree in counseling psychology. Jazakallah khair, Muhammad, of course, for being here as well.
Alhamdulillah, it's a pleasure to be here. And, I am here to, learn. I'm here to, I think, really, I'm looking forward to listen to our beloved sisters here, and also I think for us, a lot of the our Muslim organizations that we work with, over the years, I have seen struggle with this, and I think I hope that the push that we're getting now and everything that we're going through, hopefully, it's changes that are happening all throughout the country, and just. The other day, 300 CEOs and government officials, they had that Zoom meeting. It's showing that there is regardless is for economic reasons or not, I mean, that there is a push. And I think it's also a high time that in our Muslim organizations that we have to really look deep within us. And so I hope to, just be able to talk about that here and discuss with everyone here. I'm looking forward to it.
Barakallah feekum, Muhammad. Barakallah feekum. So let's get started. Again, Jazakallah khair for all our attendees. We're really trying to focus today on our role as community leaders, as organizers, as nonprofit institution, whether we're a volunteer or we're a staff member, we're a board trustee member, we're an MSA president, really trying to figure out, okay, what is it that our role should be right now internally as organizations? And then I think, which is primarily our focus, how do we as organizations solve the problems of race and bias in our organizations, and then externally how we can be allies in the greater field. But I wanted to start, so Ndidi, I'll start with you. Give us your thoughts, just generally the current state of social, racial issues in the US, the death of George Floyd, of course, which sparked this huge awakening, which was very much needed. What are your thoughts on that? What should Muslim leaders and organizers be thinking about in the current state of affairs of racial and social issues in the US?
Okay, mashallah. Well, I know you and I kind of were talking about this concept of like, what is the call? Like, what are we called to? Like, where do we stand in this moment? And I was reflecting on the Quran, and it tells us, "O you who believe, stand out firmly for justice as witnesses to Allah, even as against yourselves or your parents or your kin, and whether it be against rich or poor, for Allah can best protect both. So as we're here, Muslim organizations, Muslim leaderships, we're here as Muslims, right? And the Quran is instructing us, the guidance for mankind, Allah's haqq is telling us, instructing us that we must stand firm for justice. Qawamina bil qist, right? Or even it could be translated as custodians of justice. And so it's telling us that we have to, and the way we go about it, it says, is to be witnesses to Allah. Shuhada'a lillahi, right? So that's actually the action. The call is to be a witness to Allah. The way we go about it is through being custodians of justice. And this allows us to be witnesses to Allah. That's heavy. And the way that's heavy for us. And it's telling us no matter who is it against, whether it's ourselves, our parents, our kin, right? And that if we truly believe in Allah and trust in Him, then He will protect the innocent parties or the sincere parties involved. So we want to understand what's the responsibility at this time, as what you were saying, what is the moment calling for us to do? It's to answer this call, and the call is to justice. Who is the call for or to? The call is to all people, particularly believers. The call is to anyone who has a contribution to make, which is everyone. The call is to anyone who is directly affected. The call is to anyone who has benefited from the works or efforts of those who've been treated unjustly. The call is to anyone who has benefited from injustice through privilege, directly or indirectly. So we each have our own unique roles in answering this call. I have a unique responsibility to myself, my family, neighbors, and the Muslim community who raised me, as well as the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the community at large, as do each of you and everyone on this call. Each of us has a role, and all of us are going to be held into account in this life and the next. And as a friend mentioned, that on the Day of Judgment, after our books are read, our deeds will be weighed on the scales. And those who we've harmed or who've suffered from harm, the things that we've done, or people who've turned away while they were being harmed, they'll be coming to collect our deeds, our good deeds. And I know I don't want that, and I know no one here wants that. So I guess when we say, what is the moment call for? The moment calls to justice. And when we say why inclusion, it's the responsibility of the believing Muslim. So we're here today to better understand how we can all be accountable. And there's a very unique role and contribution and responsibility for Muslim-led organizations, not just in this moment, but as we talked about, historically it was needed, it's needed now, and it's needed in the future. So I'm glad to be here. I'm glad for the space, for Rami, Zawad, and Mohammed and the Oaktree for putting this space together, because it's the responsibility of the Muslim organizations to educate themselves and to be involved. And glad to see everyone who's participating and who wants to get more information. And my exchange, my commitment is to be in this space and to help share to whoever it may benefit.
Jazakallah khair, Sister Ndidi. Beautifully said. May Allah bless you. Jazakallah khair. I think that call from Allah, this is a greater call. It's not a call for the moment. It's not a 2020 call. It's just a commandment of Allah. I love that reflection. Sister Ismahan, your thoughts on the moment right now and our perspective as Muslim leaders and organizations.
Absolutely. I definitely do agree with what my dear sister mentioned. And really thinking about this time, I want to borrow a phrase, so to speak. I can't remember who said it first, but it was one of the activists on the ground whose shoulders that we stand on. This is not necessarily a moment. This is a movement. It's been happening for a very, very long time. And especially for us as Muslim leaders and organizations and the world at large, I think we need to take a step back and recognize how this moment fits into that larger movement for Black liberation. And even more so, the ayah that my dear sister mentioned, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us to command justice and stand tall for justice, even if it's against ourselves. There's a component of this that we tend to not focus on, which is the very first sin that was committed by a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by Iblis, was the sin of arrogance and the sin of supremacy, as I've talked about before. Like, he refused to bow down to Adam, even though he was commanded by the Lord of the worlds to do so. So he thought he was better than him because he did not know who Adam was, what he was made out of. I mean, he saw Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creating him, but in essence, he was afraid of him. So in the first sin that was created, the first sin that was committed, that sin of supremacy, that sin of arrogance, is something that till this day we are fighting, right? Subhanallah. So in this current moment that we're in, it behooves us to really think about how can we hold ourselves accountable in our leadership, in our organizations, in our community, as we are fighting against systemic racism. Because the impact of white supremacy is not just on the Black community, even though that has impacted the Black community. A lot of us who are immigrants, who are refugees, who came from war-torn countries and political strife, a lot of what we've seen, subhanAllah, has been created in the past by imperialism and colonial powers that try to divide up the world for themselves, subhanAllah. So what we're seeing today play out in these streets is that call for justice, is that cry for just the essence of our humanity as the Black community, for the Black community to be recognized. And in these moments is a huge opportunity for those who are not Black to really take a step back and listen and learn and see how the systemic oppression that we're in, how it shows up in multiple different places, right? It's not just police brutality. It's also mass incarceration. It's about school to prison pipeline, right? I mean, just the other day, I had a community member who got stopped by law enforcement, right? And alhamdulillah, I happened to be in the area for me to bear witness and record and just be there. And as soon as I started recording, everything just wrapped up real quickly, right? So how can we recognize the ways that we benefit, especially those of us who, I guess, have a sense of closeness to privilege or are privileged ourselves, even if we ourselves are a community that is suffering from Islamophobia, that is suffering from xenophobia, that's suffering from different ills. The Black experience is unique in and of itself, simply because of the fact that this whole divide and conquer and try to keep a certain sector of the community kind of oppressed and their lives to not be valued is something that has been dominant in the history of America. SubhanAllah, like we know this new world came to be because of the genocide of Native Americans. We know this new world came to be because the Europeans that settled here at that time realized they cannot build up Jamestown, they cannot build up a lot of the colonies at that time without labor and forcing labor upon the slaves that were brought here by the slave ships. So this is an opportunity for us to connect the dots, connect the history, and recognize that this is just another chapter, not necessarily a new book in the fight for Black liberation.
Jazakallah khair, Ismahan. That was beautifully said. And the history, understanding the historical elements of things is such an important part of the conversation. And I appreciate you highlighting that and bringing that up. Hasan, your thoughts, you know, if you're an MSA president, if you're a board of trustee member, if you're a youth director in an organization, if you're just a volunteer at your local community center, what should be the reflection of the moment? What is the moment about?
Sure. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wasalam. You know, just last week, an imam reached out to me, and there was a little bit of conflict between the imam and the board members. I'm not going to name the masjid because I have a lot of imams and so forth that reach out to me for consultation and so forth. Don't respect their privacy. But it's not a small masjid. If I say the name, you guys will know the masjid. It's big enough in our big communities. So, and I'll read to you basically the message that he got from the board, because he posted the imam posted a video about racism. Okay, and the message he got from the board, it says, "Assalamu alaikum. I just want to bring to your attention that the video about racism was very good, except one message about racism existing in Muslim communities. Even though it may be true that racism exists in Muslim communities, but I feel that it shouldn't have been gone in the public message from you. If it is closed audience within a masjid, it's perfectly all right to address it, but a positive message to their community that is appearing to be a negative message from everyone from you." I mean, so basically, in short, the board had a problem with the imam putting out a video. I'm not going to mention how it was done, addressing the community and addressing that, look, we too have some problems and a lot of problems in our own communities. And so I want to bring this up first because I had to do a deep dive reflection on myself. This whole if this is going on. I am a brown immigrant from a brown immigrant family. I grew up in inner city, but I had to really look in myself and think about some of the biases and that I hold, even though I the schools I went to, the neighborhoods that I grew up, part of my life, friends that I had, but still how I was impacted by my own history, my own family. 300 years of British rule has an impact on the psychology of how your own family thinks about Black people, right? And even though growing up as immigrant family and in the inner city, I had to question myself and really fight my own implicit bias. And so I want to request everyone that's on this call, that from the Muslim organizers to board members to MSA presidents, whether you are Arab, whether you are Desi, wherever your background, I think it's time that you be honest and start to do some self-reflection. I have to listen, I have to learn, and be uncomfortable, because I think white supremacy, as Sister mentioned, is something that even affects me. It's something it somehow has become part of my own psychology, and so I think that's where it begins for me. So the moment. We can talk about so many things, and I was going to have, I know you asked me, and I have done some academic work on psychology, diversity, and so forth, but I'm not really here for that today. I really want to talk about me and my own bias and what I have to work on and learn from the Black community. And I think that goes for everyone here on this call. And I think once we can fix what's inside us and really take that deep dive and start to challenge our own biases, I think then we can, as organizations, as leaders, as activists, we can be allies, we can support, and we can fight the cause of justice.
Jazakallah khair. May Allah bless you guys. I think wonderful intros to I think what Muslim leaders and organizations need to step up to right now. And like you mentioned, it's not just about right now, but definitely at this moment, I think to show up more than ever. And by the way, just generally when tests come out, we've learned this throughout our in our Islamic tradition, that tests and challenges bring out the best, right? They bring out the best leaders, they bring out the best organizations, they bring out truly people that are willing to stand up in difficult moments, and that's important. So let's dive right in. Let's get into the nitty gritty of, okay, what are communities and organizers and leaders supposed to be doing? So Ndidi, if I could start with you, if we could talk to how should us as organizations right now. So let's look internal, as Hassan pointed out with that text message to an imam. Internally as organizations, we sometimes create spaces that are very exclusive to the particularly the Black community. I want to kind of highlight that, of course, for this discussion, but other communities as well, but they might not fit the majority in a Muslim community. So they're not the majority of a masjid, they're not the majority of an organization. So they're kind of a minority, but particularly the Black community. How are we as leaders, how are we as organizations supposed to be inclusive right now of the Black community?
How should we be inclusive right now of the Black community?
Not just right now. Maybe that's not good. How should we be inclusive of the Black community?
Okay. How am I? Okay. How or why? How should we be inclusive? How should we bring in Black Muslims into programs and things like that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think you could start with the why as well. And I think you did that very eloquently about the why, about the cousin.
So I think, so I'll try to take a hit at this different framing, but so, it's always hard for me to answer the question of why should there be inclusion? Because to me, it's like, how is that ever even a question? Not that you're asking that specifically, but even the fact that we have to even have these conversations sometimes surprises, I won't say surprises me, but it's interesting. But I think that, I don't know, I think that when we're talking about the question of why should we be inclusive, the real question for me is, what is it that blinds organizations from being inclusive, right? So I kind of want to pose that question back, which is, what is it that's blinding organizations? Mohammed mentioned the email from the imam. What is the ethos there? Like, why would this, what is it? I mean, I kind of want to pose that question back of like, so what are the things that blind us to having a diversity of voice and particularly national organizations, but organizations in Masajid that tout that they represent Muslims. I have my own views, but I definitely kind of want to hear other people's thoughts. And then I think from there, I can kind of discuss the second part.
Sure, absolutely. Ismahan, what are we missing in the inclusion space? What are we missing when it comes to the inclusion element within our organizations? Whether most are community-based, some are, as Ndidi mentioned, are national-based. What is missing in the inclusion dynamics or culture that we have in our organizations?
Okay. So I'm not sure, again, I'm not looking at the attendees list, but if you know me that I'm a straight shooter. So what I'm about to say might be uncomfortable, but it's the reality. And because I get this a lot, sometimes so let me back up a little bit and then I'll say what I gotta say. So in the kind of environment that we're living in, right? Organizations and institutions and corporations, there's a bottom line that folks care about. That your branding, your reputation, all those things are impacting whatever it is that's coming in, whether it's a product, whether it's a service, whether it's social service, events that you're doing. It doesn't matter. You could be a masjid, you could be a Muslim organization, you can be a corporation. At the end of the day, there is an element that within the capitalistic society that we live in, where we have to meet bottom lines. And because we have to meet bottom lines, we tend to not sit with uncomfortability and honesty. It's not about, I care about this, or, I believe that we should be inclusive, or I believe that, Black Lives Matter, or I believe that we should diversify our boards, or I believe that we should diversify our executive teams or volunteers or anybody that's coming in. I think for a lot of us, we're on the same page in regards to that. That's the bottom line. How do we go above that? Sometimes we're uncomfortable to sit with that truth of realizing that when we need to have these honest conversations, because it's not about what practices do you have in place. Well, that's critical, and I'll leave that conversation to the consultant. What practices are in place for diversity, for inclusivity, and all of that, right? But what is the culture that you're building in that space? And I'll give you an example. If I, as a Black Muslim sister, comes into a space, and I've seen this happen many, many times, where all of a sudden it's like, a quick salam alaikum, not necessarily any welcome by, the executive team that's there, or the folks, the environment that we're kind of like building. What culture, what space are we cultivating that is welcoming? And then the second element of it is, if folks are saying that they can't find a person of color, or a Black person to kind of serve on a board, or to serve on a committee, or to lead a project, that is a sign that you need to expand your social network. Because it's not that folks are not there, it's that you have limited yourself, and people are uncomfortable with that truth. Because sometimes if you look at your friends list and you can do a quick 10-second check-in, think about your top friends. How many of that are inclusive of communities of color? Family gatherings. right? It starts with the personal before it even shows up in the public spaces. So we have to have that honest conversation instead of worrying about how is this going to make our organization look, or how is this going to make our center look? What message are we sending? Because Islam is clear. Islam came to tell us to eradicate racism, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created equal, everybody. So how can we sit with that uncomfortable truth where we care more about inclusivity than we do about our bottom lines or how we look or appear to others? Which brings me to another point that I would like to share. This is not something that I personally made or something that came from my thought process. I got it from a sister, my dear sister, Hiba Al-Haddad, who is in the Bay Area. I'm not sure where she got it, but inclusion asks, has everyone's ideas been heard? Keep that in mind. Inclusion asks, has everybody's ideas been heard? Let me actually start off with diversity, because everybody loves the word diversity. Diversity asks, what's in the room? And equity responds, who's trying to get in the room but can't? Whose presence in the room is under constant threat of erasure? And inclusion asks, has everyone's ideas been heard? And justice responds, whose ideas won't be taken as seriously because they aren't in the majority, or they don't fit into that kind of homogenous folks that are there. Diversity asks, how many more of, and you can pick any minority identities, group do we have this year than last? Maybe we have 2 more Black folks on our board, or we have a staff member who's Black. And then equity responds, what conditions have we created that maintain certain groups as the perpetual majority here? Inclusion asks, is this environment safe for everyone to feel like they belong? And then justice challenges, whose safety is being sacrificed and minimized to allow others to be comfortable maintaining dehumanizing views. And this is actually from Dafina Lazarus Stewart. So let's think about that for a second. We tend to kind of stick to diversity, inclusion, which leads us to tokenizing folks, saying, okay, let me check off. I have a Somali on the board. I have, so-and-so from that background leading this group, we're good. But when we go beyond the individual to systemic change and cultural change within our organizations and centers, it makes a huge impact. If someone comes into a center or an organization and they're spewing racist or, terminologies, how do we have a zero tolerance approach for that, right? And because sometimes you'd be thinking, well, that's not me. I'm the imam, or I'm the president. I had nothing to do with that. But in essence, the actions that we take feeds into the type of culture that we're trying to create. So yeah, sometimes we might mean well, we might be well-intentioned, but if we're not conscious of our blinders, which means that we have to educate ourselves and go that extra mile and recognize what are the ways that I am perpetuating kind of like that systemic racist structures that exist in society, because we're not all free from the system. We're operating within a system. And because we're operating within a system, we constantly need to ask ourselves, how can we hold ourselves accountable? What kind of culture, what kind of systems are we putting in place that we're hearing everybody in the room? And I'll say this last part, and inshallah, is inclusivity. People misuse that terminology. And I'll give an example that I've always given. Inclusivity, this is what we mean by inclusivity. If you're sitting in a circle, say that every person in your organization is sitting in a circle with a chair, and then I came in or somebody else came in, inclusivity does not mean that that person has to go get a chair and figure out where to sit. Inclusivity is what we naturally do, which everybody makes space together without even anything being said, so that that person can sit and be part of that group. And then you take a look around and say, who's missing from the conversation? Because when everybody looks like you, everybody acts and thinks like you, then we're not getting out of our comfort zones. And that's a little bit hard to sit with. But in that uncomfortability is where the growth happens.
Beautifully said. Very strong point, and always keeping it real. May Allah bless you. So I think Hasan and mashallah, there's some questions in the chat We really want, and mashallah, I see a lot of amazing community leaders in the attendees. Please do send us your questions. I'd like to get them in, your thoughts, your reflections as we're going. Again, this is meant to be a conversation style. I think, Hasan, the question that's in the chat, and I want you to address it as well, is, so what is missing here? What is being missed? Why is it that board of trustees, leaders of organizations, they don't go beyond that comfort level to include people that are of different backgrounds to them, and particularly obviously in this discussion, the Black community or Black members of our community? Why is it, what is going on maybe from a psychological perspective behind bias and racism that people are not being aware of or conscious of?
I think what's missing is intention. It's like you have to, the question is, it took us Black Lives Matter movement for us Muslim to finally even think about these things, seriously. And that's sad. And then we could talk about policies. I'm sure Sister Ndidi and you and I can talk, and Rami, we can talk about hiring process. We can talk about, projects for social justice. We can talk about, how do we, have zero tolerance policies in our organizational culture. We could talk about that. I'm sure we give details, and I'm sure there's a lot of work out there for that. But I think what's missing is intention. Intention means I have to prioritize, and like with everything going on with youth issues, with Islamophobia, why should I prioritize being allied to the Black community? Why should I prioritize being inclusive? Like, we have so much going on in the masjid, so much going on in the MSA, so much going on in the National Muslim Organization. Why prioritize this? And I think that's where we get stuck. And I think if we can get over that hurdle and realize that in this moment, us being on the sideline, like that Asian police officer in Minneapolis, us being on the sideline is actually killing people. And we are contributing to the injustice of our society. And literally, and so once we come to that realization and realize this is a high priority, just like our youth, high priority, just like our work against Islamophobia, then I think we can start talking about policies and talk about other efforts.
Can I just jump into that, Rami?
Yes, of course, jump right in, Ndidi.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate people who tried to attempt to answer the question that I posed back to the panel, and I appreciate you give me the space to do that, right? Because you asked me a question, I asked it back, right? But yeah, Mohammed, man, that's a good point, because the reality is, and I heard the same point made by two different people who I both respect on two different days, and they didn't even know that they both said it. One was the musician Brother Ali, who a lot of people may know. He's an albino white American who actually comes from a Black Muslim community that I came from as well. And the other is the scholar, Dr. Bilal Ware. And both of them said, well, this is my part, is people make the mistake of thinking that there is a such thing as liberation without liberating Black people. You're not, like, the key to everyone's survival, this is their points. What they said was the key to everyone's survival is the liberation of Black people. Everybody in the model community, the model citizens, right? This model that was the precipice for a lot of immigrants to come into the country. This was formulated by the powers that be, right? As an affront to the the civil rights movement and the movement for Black justice, right? Was to the work that we did, my parents and foreparents did to gain civil rights in this country. As we know, changed the immigration laws that allowed my father, because I'm from African American experience and the Nigerian American experience, people like my father to come into this country, right? But what folks were sold on was this idea of the model citizen. And folks still have that in their head in 2020, right? And I think we know that September 11th was a blow to the Muslim community at large as comfort, right? Meaning it was a wake-up call for all of us, But for those of us who had been living a lifestyle of, I don't want to say privilege, but who had been living a lifestyle free from the realities of those who were, of others who've been treated unjustly in this country, that everybody got to experience some direct front. So now we have this concept. We coined this terminology, Islamophobia. And my experience working for the late Muslim American leader Imam Muhammad, when September 11th happened, I was working at the mosque here, and all of a sudden we got an influx of Muslims from immigrant Muslim communities and suburban communities saying, hey, we know that you guys have been engaged in civics and politics and all these different things. We know that you've been doing extensive interfaith relations and all of these type of things. Can you connect us with the people you've been working to, because we're suffering? And we did that. You know what I'm saying? We opened that. But then people kind of take the opportunities and they make the connections, and then you don't hear from them. And then they build communities and organizations. And so what happens is, so I guess my point, I say all this to say that, and sometimes we think, as the Muslim community thinks, we can build and buy and do buy our way into liberation, buy our way into acceptance, buy our way into privilege. And that's not the key. The key is, if the most, and this is from the organizing standpoint, I started off with my impotence being for Quran. That's the reason, right? Because Allah says so, right? But as an organizer, we know that people also operate in self-interest, right? And we know that, people they move on the things that affect them directly as well. So we as an ummah have to understand that only until the most disrespected, oppressed by society, and degraded people are elevated, will everyone else be free for elevation, and will be free from Islamophobia, will be free from all these other things. So that's I hope that was helpful.
No, beautifully said. And I think that's actually a hadith of the Prophet that says, your victory comes with how you treat your most vulnerable, your most, those that are the most oppressed, those that that are most vulnerable in society. And I think that's a really, really important reminder and reflection. Yeah, go ahead.
Anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I meant to share that to you. So wherever there's injustice, if it's coming from me, you're next. That's how that works. Absolutely.
Mashallah, beautiful reflection. And mashallah, some amazing questions in the comments. I want to bring them up. I think they're really relevant. The last two were really around the idea of homogeneous organizations, homogeneous communities, and how do you cultivate the diversity? What happens when this is an Arab mosque, or what happens when this is a Desi mosque? And then you have particular kinds of people, usually Black communities or other communities, but particularly in Black communities, in those cases, they're on the fringes of that community. So they're not in leadership. Their voices are not heard. They're not brought in. So there's several questions here, and I thank Ahlam and Rubina for asking them. How do you create spaces that are more diverse when people tend to flock to, they like to be around people that are, the homogeny, they like to be around people just like them? How do you elevate that? How do you create a masjid or a center or a space or an organization that is able to break through the shackles of this diversity or lack of too much homogeny, too much of the same ethnicities, backgrounds over and over? I'll give this to you, Ismahan, first.
I have a different view on this. I think it's beautiful when we see that. And I'm coming from an individual who serves on the board of a masjid in a local community center that serves predominantly Somali refugee community. So when you're kind of cultivating a space like that, it's beneficial to the community, especially for those who are, do not speak English, so to speak. But at the same time, also you have a specific centers, specific spaces where you want to make sure that you're diversifying, right? My advice first is do a power analysis. And I know in a political term, it has its own connotation, but I think we can adapt it on an organizational as well as community based centers and massages as well. who holds power in your community, whose voices are listened to, and how can you create that space beyond just developing systems that kind of create that culture that I was talking about. How can you do that is by listening and holding those community listening sessions and being able to put on programs that cater towards everybody, not necessarily just one specific group, right? So one of the things that I've learned on the grounds of this is, if I'm going to create a program for community, if I'm going to create a service for community, sometimes I have to check myself, because I gravitate towards my background as a Somali and realize, when I'm talking about community, am I specifically talking about my Somali community or the larger Muslim community of all different ethnicities and beautiful skin shades? So my first thing that I will do is listen, and then do a power analysis and see who holds the power in your specific organization and whose voice are listened to. And then sitting with that uncomfortable truth, and I keep bringing this up because that's where, like I said, the change happens. And then hearing those stories, doing that power analysis, and then seeing what those results are and acting on it based on your specific organization. Because what's true for San Diego can be completely different than what's true for New York. But one thing is true, the stories are there. People want to be in a space where everybody gets to see each other, right? But when you have one or two unpleasant kind of interactions or experiences, that completely turns you away. I remember in my earlier years, there's folks who will come up to me, subhanAllah, and try to advise me, which I'm always open to advice, but it's people who I'm like, I don't know you. What are you advising me on? I brought a sister who just accepted Islam, and this brother came up and subhanAllah started spewing all these things like, why are you wearing nail polish? Why are you doing this? And I said, she just accepted the Shahada like 20 minutes ago. Hold on, lower your gaze and keep it moving. This is not your issue, right? And so what kind of culture are we creating when we talk about being inclusive of everybody, inshallah? So I don't know that I necessarily
no, yeah. I love that. So the number one step is to analyze, obviously, the reality of your community. You have to have a good idea of who's holding power, who are in these positions, what voices are there, what groups are there. I think that's the point. That awareness, that consciousness is really important, right? So that you don't go into default mode and it's just the same kind of people always leading, always being there.
Right. And then I think the other thing I would add is listening is so critical, because I know in my community here, specifically in San Diego, I'm listened to. If I go to any of the massages or any of the organizations, because of my experience and because of my activism and because I've been in the front lines, folks are going to listen to me. So how can we not be gatekeepers, right? And think we hold things within ourselves as community leaders and as community board members. How do we open up space and recognize that, we're not there to say, hey, community, this is an opportunity for us to gatekeep in terms of how to be part of this organization or be part of this masajid or be part of it, be part of whatever it is that you're part of. How can we get away from that mentality of being gatekeepers and recognize that what's differentiating between me and somebody else is not necessarily because, oh, I'm a leader, right? It's because I've been given an opportunity to lead. So what kind of spaces are we cultivating to give that same opportunity for folks of all backgrounds, and particularly our Black community?
Excellent. That segues me right into Ndidi. This question is really important around same topic, around a lot of times I've heard this a lot in our nonprofit leaders. People say, oh, I don't see color. I don't see color, hiring this youth director. I don't see color. Helping this volunteer, I don't see color, promoting this staff member, I don't see color. So how do you, Ndidi, how should organizations empower Black community members into leadership roles as leaders? How do we avoid this tokenized syndrome? How should an organization empower particularly Black members of its organization or of its community?
Okay, so one, I wanted to speak firstly to that point about I don't see color. I heard a person once say, if you don't see color, then you don't see me, right? I think it's a beautiful sentiment that people sometimes want to use that terminology to suggest that I don't see differences of human beings, right? But Allah created us differently. لِتَعَارِفُ, as the Quran says, right? So that we may know each other. So we do come in differences of height and color and gender, and differences of personality types and skill sets and things that we add that create this beautiful tapestry of al-Islam, right? And of humanity, yes? And so, so if you're saying I'm blind to it, that's almost suggesting that you're not paying specific attention to the things that make me unique, and also which would need for me to have a unique set of needs. My niece and nephew are Nigerian, African American, and white. They're very pale or fair. They need more sunscreen than I do, right? Because the beautiful melanin that's in my skin protects me, not completely, but to an extent, from sunburn, right? So they have different needs than I do because of how Allah made them uniquely different than me. So I just wanted to touch based on that one. I think it's important to honor our differences and provide whatever those differences need to accommodate. So that's first and foremost. Now, the second part was, you were saying, how do we empower African-American Muslims? And I think, and I want to just I want to throw some names out there. Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, Keith Ellison, Andre Carson. These are all Muslim Americans who have been made undeniable, prolific contributions to either American society at large or Islam in America, or prolific contributions to the global community. And they all are African-American Muslims, and they're all Muslims who come from a rich tapestry and legacy of Islam in America, 3 of which come from the same Muslim community that I did in terms of Muhammad Ali, Keith Ellison, Andre Carson, and then Malcolm X came from a shared community experience, right? So we have African-American Muslims who are already empowered, right? We exist, and I think one of the comments was saying about the different cities, and I think Ismahan, she's been touching on so many of my points. I think we're probably saying some of the same things, but there's never, to me, it's very, there's never an excuse to say, oh, well, we couldn't find anyone, because we are the cities that are most robust with African Americans and Black people, and also the Black Muslim community is not monolithic. As African American, as East African, West African, South African, as Afro-Latina, right? It's Sunni, it's Shia, right? It's huge, yeah. So there's never a dearth of talent. Really what it is a dearth of information, of people not knowing people beyond their comfort zones and beyond their silos. We all do that. We all work with the people who we know and who we see all the time or whatever, but it's incumbent upon us to go outside of that. Now, specifically to this point of how do we empower? So there are people their talent is already there. So the question of why and how and all, it's for the benefit of your own organization. That's the why. For the salvation of your soul, because Allah says so, right? But then beyond that, for the benefit of your organization, because when you're not adding to this rich tapestry, then you're doing yourself a disservice. But beyond that, how do we empower them? There are folks who are already empowered. You need to call on them. So it's about educating yourself to find out who, and us ourselves too, right? Educating ourselves to find out who are the skilled people across the board in this area or that talent or versed in this unique skill set that we need, and to be, as Muhammad mentioned, intentional, right? That has representation that reflects Islam in America, that it reflects the universality of al-Islam, right? But I came up in a community we're very do for, like, our mantra was do for self. We never looked for handouts or hand-ups. We weren't invited to the table. We just built our own. But I'm trying to hold this space for those who are in communities where they are the only Black person there. They're one of few. I have a very diverse background. I went to I'm more closer to, I'm Muslim. I don't use the descriptors. The way I practice Islam would be closer to what you would say Sunni Islam. I say I follow the Sunnah of Islam, of Muhammad. But But I went to, for one section of school, I went to an Irani Shia school, right? Because it was the best Muslim school in the area that my parents could get me to, right? And so, we have to call ourselves into account to do the work of intentional, I won't even say inclusion, but of intentional working together, and it comes to the benefit of ourselves. But in terms of empowering, I'm holding the space for those individuals who are that 2 or 3 Black kids over here and there. And I think that the way that you do it is you give them a voice. And I think Ismahan mentioned in terms of listening, active listening. I think that with for lack of a better term, inclusion, we have to, I was trying to, because I know there's different points you want to bring up, and I don't want to bring up certain points too early. But there is between allyship, coalition building, all of these different things, for me, it's assessing yourself, your own biases. And I think Mohammed spoke to that earlier. It is assessing the culture of your organization. And Ismahan mentioned that, right? Being honest, having these hard conversations. I'm a leader, I feel this way, I see the importance, but if I'm honest, there's no space here at this organization. Because you don't want to bring people in and then offend them. You don't want to bring people in and then injure them or have them injured by a culture that's not ready for the change that you feel that is called to, right? And then do your research. We need to research the history of America, of movements in America, the history of Islam in America, and the history of major movements. Because you can't live in a country if you don't understand the history of the people who are in it and the things that they suffered. We need to connect. I'll pause there, I'll leave that for the other parts of the conversation, but those are the first 2. And then you connect with like minds and people who are doing the work, and you bring them in and you have them advise you. If there are young, if you are like, let's say a Pakistani majority mosque, and there are some Black Muslims, whether it be any part of the African diaspora in there, and you can ask them, you can just have a conversation. What is it that you want? What do you want for yourself? What do you want to get out of this masjid? What do you want to get out of this Muslim youth program? In an ideal situation, what is it that you need to help you strengthen yourself as a Muslim? How can we better do that? And then when they tell you, then you know what you do? You let them lead that. You lead from the most affected. You let them lead it. They lead the conversation. They lead the talk. And not just, because they're Black. Usually you'll find some of the people that come to these tables are skilled and intelligent and competent, beyond competent, and add a voice that you would have missed out on if you hadn't incorporated that. So I hope this answers your question.
No, that's wonderful. Jazakallah khairan. No, I love the Ndidi. Jazakallah khairan. And mashallah, y'all are doing a great job trying to answer these. We're getting some amazing questions in here, and I'm trying to get to all of them and navigate all of them. We had some topics that we wanted to hit as well as panelists, but I appreciate everybody's questions, and please keep sending them to us, inshallah. We're going to try to get to all of them as we get through this. So Hasan, I wanted to bring you on. So I know we had some questions that we wanted to discuss. I'm trying to lump some of them together and asking, so how does bias impact a lot of the ways our organization function that, maybe organizations or leaders don't realize? Whether it's like an election at an MSA or, how you're treating somebody. I know you were a youth director for several years in the community, or how it impacts how you look at different young people you're working with, or how we're looking at volunteers, or how we're recruiting in a national organization. Can you speak to us a little bit about how bias shows up there and kind of like what we should be conscious about when we are leading in a community?
And I want to just go on to the point Sister Isma mentioned about diversity versus power. And I think that's very important because you have a masjid in New York in a heavily, predominantly Bangladeshi community. And so in that local everybody walks to the masjid. It's a dense inner city. So in that space, you're going to have more Bangladeshis attending. So the solution is not one day I'm going to see in the congregation certain percentage of colors. Like that's not the goal. There will be organization that's catering to Somalian immigrant refugees. Like there's a special service for that. That's a very needed work. I think the question here is more about power, right? And I think Sister Ismahan spoke to that. I think it begins with each and every single one of us, volunteers, activists, leaders, presidents, to ask what are the biases that we hold. It's by the way, it's normal. It's normal to feel comfortable within your own people, quote unquote, because we grew up. We develop certain understanding about people, and we all have our own biases, right? And I don't want to give a sociology 101 class here and talk about bias versus prejudice versus discrimination. I'll give you the definitions and how it works. There are some ideas that we develop about the world that helps us kind of navigate the world, right? And because we need to be able to put people in boxes for us to be able to realize, am I in or am I out? Is this person from my group or outside my group? This helps us navigate life. But unfortunately, when you have years and years of history, because slavery in this country was very recently. I mean, I think people forget the timeline. 200 years of slavery, another 100 years of of segregation, and then only 50 years. If you look at the timeline, it's just very recently, right? And so the impact it has on us individually. So if you ask a simple question, I think Sister Ismahan mentioned that very early on. Who are the 5 top people that you trust? Right? You just ask yourself that question. I ask myself that question. What are the 5 top people that I trust? And then if I ask, in those top 5 people that I trust, non-family members, what are their race, ethnicity? What are their education level? What are their annual household income? You start to realize that you tend to stick around with people that are very much like you. So there's on a personal level that there is a level of responsibility to expand, right? And shu'uban wa qaba'il lita'arafu, and that's a Quranic instruction to for us to get to know one another, right? And it's so amazing. We live in a country like the United States, and for me in New York City, where I went to school with probably 28 different nationalities in the same classroom with the 30 students, right? Yet we taste each other's food, right? And in New York City, you could taste food of anybody, but tasting food is one thing. Knowing about the culture is another thing, and really trusting people to get into business with them, trusting people to work on a project with them, trusting people to get married with, then really some of the stuff shows up. It's easy to taste food, wear the wear the clothing, and have a African shawl around your neck. It's very easy to do that kind of stuff. But really, when it really comes to a question, when you say, who do you really trust? There's a person I have to ask, and every single one of us in this call ask, what are my personal biases? I mean, there are so many studies on this. I mean, there was a famous experiment that was done that you play the role of a cop, right? And you're shown a picture of a black man or a white man, and they're holding something on their pocket. You're not really sure what it is. It can be a bag, it can be a gun, it can be whatever. You get only a few seconds to decide whether or not to shoot. And over and over again, right? The study shows that people shot a black character over again. They even had a NAACP local president come and do that test, the implicit bias test, and he himself even shot the black character more times than a white character. Stuff that starts to affect you internally, right? There was a brother that came to the masjid. I won't mention the masjid name, and he said, "Can I talk to the imam?" And this brother, and I was standing there. This brother said, "Brother, if you want to get donation, you have to fill out a form in the office." Okay, this brother was a PhD professor, and unfortunately, this board member, first thing he thought when this brother was asking for the imam, typically, why would a black brother ask for an imam? He probably wants donation. Stuff. I mean, the mindset that we have developed, the kind of the bias we have developed, and this makes more sense, especially for some of the immigrant much that are predominantly of folks from immigrant community. And you start to develop these kind of mindset, right? And so I think a challenge for all of us in this call, myself first, and then all of us on this call, is to ask myself, what are the biases I have? When I say the word black men, what are the first words, images that comes to your mind? When I say a blonde white woman, what are the images and a description that comes to your mind right away? What are the pictures in your mind, right? And I think you kind of ask yourself that question, and that's where it starts. And so I think I want to give at this point here, personally take a responsibility and asking myself, one, am I being upfront about my own biases? Two, am I intentionally engaging with with the Black community, with people that are different than me, intentional, and not just tasting food, not just and I think Justin Bieber said he benefited from the Black culture, right? And so much in the entertainment industry, but how much have you beyond just cultural appropriation, beyond just boring things, beyond just music, what have you done to engage? What have you done to really get involved and bring people to your personal circle, right? And Sister Isma mentioned your family gatherings, your weddings. You mentioned your business partners. I mean, that's where really things count. So I think that's number two. And then number three, of course, is standing up within your own family. And this begins with us leaders here, people who are running organizations, and you want to make policies, you want to make hiring different changes. You want to bring do programs and awareness month in your masjid. That's great. That's amazing. That's beautiful. You want to support the cause, and you want to donate, take some of your donation and fundraise for a social justice cause. Amazing, beautiful. But I think it had to begin by us, our family members, when we hear comments in the house, and our uncle who's a little older and makes a comments about something, whether or not I'm standing up, whether or not I'm saying something, and in a board member, a big donor, he's a big donor, and he makes a comment. Am I going to stand up as an imam? Am I going to stand up as a volunteer? Or am I going to say, no, let me let this pass? So I think that's where really it counts.
Jazakallah khair, Muhammad. Jazakallah khair. Great reflections on implicit bias and the unconscious tendencies. And subhanAllah, again, they manifest in ways that we don't realize. A lifetime's worth of images, stories, movies, pictures influences tremendously your psyche, what you think of, what you recall, what you reflect on. Unfortunately, it affects from colonialism to modern social media. It affects what we think of. What are the first thoughts or images, characteristics that we think of when we see or perceive people? So there's a strong implicit element to it, and a kind of like unconscious element. Ismahan, so again, we had a lot of questions, and by the way, again, great comments and great reflections, all the attendees. I really appreciate everybody's engagement. A really powerful question that came in where somebody's asking Ismahan, what happens if those biases are not implicit? What if they are explicit? What if someone is being inappropriate in an organization? What if the leader is being inappropriate? That they believe things that are inappropriate, they're saying things that are inappropriate, whether they're outright, so they're explicitly racist practices going on in an organization dynamic or within a community. The question is, what should we do? Should we kick them out of the organization? Should we kick them out of the community? Should they be blacklisted? How does that coincide with you trying to be inclusive of everyone in the community, not making people feel isolated? That's kind of the great question by one of the attendees. How do you address explicit racism or bias?
Short answer is zero tolerance towards racism, and no excuses made. And then the second thing also, there is going to be, like I said earlier, the impact of the white supremacist system is on all of us, right? So some of us are still trying to free our minds, so to speak, as Malcolm X mentioned beautifully in his autobiography, is free our minds from that kind of colonial hold and the imperialistic kind of like viewpoints that we're still left with, right? And just to kind of maybe just share two quick experiences is I travel a lot. I travel a lot to multiple different cities. And one specific city that I went to, I think I was really, really exhausted, went to the masjid to go pray, and then just rest for a little bit before my next engagement. And just as I'm sitting there, and I'm not too well versed in Arabic, but I can understand it here and there. And, someone just called me the N-word. And I was kind of like shocked that this just really happened, and I was just too exhausted to deal with it. And I said, if I can't deal with it right now, I don't know who else is going to have to deal with this, right? So I went to that sister and spoke with her. I said, that's unacceptable, and held space with her. Even though I'm not part of that masjid, I'm not part of that organization, I was just passing by as a traveler, subhanAllah. And another time, I was in a specific situation where I was going from multiple cities back to back. So the way I kind of organized my time was go to this specific city, pray at this masjid, inshallah, because I try my best to pray at a masjid whenever I have the opportunity to do so. And so as soon as I pray, move on to the next city, inshallah. And I wasn't allowed to come into the masjid. And this is, you know, I was just like, what century are we in? Like, what do you mean I'm not allowed to come into the masjid and pray? Subhanallah. So they asked me to go all the way in the back. They judged me because I still had my luggage with me, haven't had a chance to check in because I'm checking in at the next city, just passing through this other city, subhanallah. And because I had this luggage, because I am a Black Muslim, automatically I was assumed that I was homeless, and, you know, I was trying to look for a place to sleep and rest, which I really was looking for a place to rest so my soul can pray, my soul can rest in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so that I can rest. I mean, I just landed from the airplane, was going to give a quick hour talk, and then I had to move on to the next city, subhanallah. So in these moments, it made me think, if this is what I'm facing, and I'm very kind of like an easygoing person, I can't imagine what my Black Muslim community and others are facing as well. So my approach has always been zero tolerance. Yes, we want to create a space of healing and a space where everybody feels welcome, but we also have to create a space of accountability, right? That if individuals are going to harm folks with their words, or want to harm others physically, verbally, or any other type of explicit or implicit kind of like racist things that kind of show up, we have to create that culture of accountability. Yes, you need to take a moment now. Maybe we can't kick you out of the masjid, but if it's within an organization and this person holds positions of power, then yes, that accountability looks like firing that person for those racist ideologies and for the racist explicit things that you've said. If it's a community member coming into the space, then yes, I would take the opportunity to provide kind of like that teaching, not from the person of color that's been impacted, because that is a burden that we should not be shouldering. To be honest, as sisters, we're always constantly asked about our hijab, and we have a good laugh about it. It's an opportunity for da'wah many times. But at the same time, it does get exhausting when it's simple questions like, do you shower with that? Do you go home with that, right? And I think one of our sisters here in San Diego, subhanAllah, somebody asked her like, oh, I thought she was on a Zoom call, and said, wait, I thought you didn't wear your hijab at home, right? So that just is kind of like a small commentary on that. So have a zero tolerance approach. And if it's within the leadership of an organization, then the accountability has got to be heavier, because you want to show exactly the culture that we're setting. Which brings me to another point, Rami, inshallah, and I'll end with this. When we're thinking about being inclusive of our African-American, Black American community, Muslim or non-Muslim, there's an element of, we have to go into their communities. You know, there's this charity kind of like savior complex that we have to deal with. Like, we have to do this, we have to provide this. It's like, no, we're good. We're good, alhamdulillah. You know, when it comes to issues that we're fighting for right now, I'm seeing just across the nation, as all of you are, the cries of justice and accountability that we're hearing, people showing up, we're not going to celebrate you for that, right? And you showing up and you participating and you wanting to kind of create an inclusive space, especially as Muslims who are ambassadors of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, you know, who are, you know, subhanAllah, those individuals and those community members and community leaders and community organizations, and you name it, I can go through the entire list. The onus is on us to educate. The onus is on us to be able to say, you know what, it's not about me going into this community and saying, what can I do for you? You come into that community to serve. You come into that community to listen. You don't come into that community with a savior complex, which sometimes we have a difficulty understanding, because we're like, oh, subhanAllah, as Muslims, the giving hand is better than the receiving hand, which alhamdulillah is a hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. But sometimes we misattribute that hadith, right? And we believe when we come, we're coming with that charity. When we come, we're coming in with this of idea of we're going to empower you. Sometimes it's about passing that mic and recognizing that creating that space means sometimes just listening. And creating that space sometimes means I have to take that burden, especially for my non-Black Muslim brothers and sisters, especially the Arab and Desi community, specifically to teach and have conversations within our communities to kind of dismantle this concept of racism, both the systemic racism and the individualized racism we know exists because it's the legacy of Shaitan. And how can we go towards the legacy of the prophets together, inshallah? Wallahu a'lam.
Very well said.
No, Rami, I'm just going to offer a challenge. Challenge to all the and advice and a challenge to all the community leaders, organizational leaders that are here. Every single masjid that I know, every single MSA, some MSAs, national organization, you all created a emergency committees or a think group to deal with this COVID-19. Everyone did. At some form or another, they kind of sat down and made strategy. How are we going to fund the masjid while there's no attendees, there's no congregation? How are we going to deal with the economics? How are we going to do virtual programming? We all did. What I'm asking is every single organization, are we going to be intentional in setting up a think tank, committee, whatever it means for you in your organization? Say, how are we going to address this issue of Black Lives Matter? How are we going to address the issue of bias in our community, in our organization? How are we going to address better educate ourselves and our community? Are we going to actually make this a serious agenda on our plate or not? And I think that's where it comes down. So I think if we did that, I think we're creative enough. We can learn from people that are experts. And we can learn from the Black leadership and organizers and people been on the ground for a long time. But I think it begins by all the organizations here, all the nonprofits here, making this a part of the agenda, immediately. Every single company is doing it. And whether they're doing it for the economics, yes, I know it's for the money, and Nike knew it 2 years ago that this is going to work, so they went with Colin Kaepernick. But I mean, these are strategic decisions they make. They know where the wind is going, and they know where their bottom line is. But forget that. For us, it's a duty of our faith, right? And maybe it took George Floyd's murder to wake us up. It took that 8 minutes, 46 seconds for us to really see, okay, this is serious. Maybe it took all that. Maybe it took all the things that are happening around us. But I think it's high time that every single organization here, if you do anything out of this webinar and out of this our discussion today, is to go back and say, okay, let's create a committee. Let's create a task force. How are we going to deal with within our own masjid, within our own masjid, within our own nonprofit? How are we going to address this agenda of justice, within ourselves first, and then of course being allies and inclusive and everything else afterwards.
That's very well said. Ndidi, I'm going to come to you to add to that. I guess this is all around, but what does it mean to be an ally of the Black community right now, as an organization, as a community leader? I love the idea of, like, you should do this audit, you should create those think tanks, you should create those committees. What more should organizations or community leaders, what am I supposed to do to fill the space of, being an ally right now for the greater Black community?
Okay, so I think, how do I be an ally to the Black community? So I know part of there was allyship, and there's also like coalition building and all this these concepts, right?
Yeah, either one. You could take
something, and it's still kind of like on my mind. So I'm trying to see how I can connect the two. It's a lot of good discourse here. So what I was originally kind of having the conversation, the place that I was kind of originally pointing out was this concept of assessing, research, connect, and build. So I'll take it there first. It's part of that assessment that Mohammed was talking about, assessing your individual self, assessing your organization. Is there space? Because as he mentioned, and I was going to share at some point, for me, I don't think there's any harm for you if you're an organization that offers a unique service to a unique demographic of the community. So if you're Burma Task Force for Rohingya Muslims, if you're a Syrian Community Network, if you are Muslims for Darfur, or Muslims supporting Latino Muslims or any number of Black Muslim organizations. If you have a specific service, but my concern is if you are saying that you're a national organization or you're an organization you tout and you're feathering your cap is that we do this for Muslims and your body and your membership don't look like that, right? So you have to, and so those are the ones that that are firstly held into account, because you don't get to have the glory, right, of saying that I have this national organization, we do all Muslims, and then your body and your leadership. So your leadership needs to mirror the body, and that should mirror the demographics of Islam in America. But for the specific Muslim organizations that work on direct services for a direct, unique part of the population, I personally am not mad at that. But having an assessment of, okay, we say we're this, what does it look like? Is that true? Is there space? Should we, and talk with the leadership, is there space? We need to be aggressive and assertive in this conversation. This is the task force that we should have, right? And then, so that's the assessment. Okay, so there is capacity there. Okay, then, like I said, do the research on the history, connect with those. I can drop some links to books in the chat so that people can have access to just some quick ways to just have a better understanding of the demographics and the history that you're walking into and that you're trying to engage with. Because you don't want to come into a space unaware of what those who have trespassed before, or the trespasses of those before, right? The offenses or injuries of those before. That way you know how to engage. Then you build, right? You build relationships. So we talked about that, having relationships. When I was younger, my mentor, Imam Muhammad, he had a relationship with Kiara Lubick, which is in the Folklore movement, which is a Catholic organization based out of Trent. And they focus on embodying the characteristics of Mother Mary and Maryam radiallahu anha. And they're very peaceful, loving people. And it was healing for this Black American Muslim community to engage, because there were so many historic hurts that were suffered by this community from white people. So for a lot of people from my parents' generation, they needed to have positive relationships with white people, right? That were different from the ones that they'd had coming up, right? And it was restorative for them. It was restorative on the other side. And me and the youth of those groups, we built relationships. So when all this came out, I got sincere, not that I'm sorry you're Black text message, right? But it was like, hey, how are you? I'm just checking in. I'm sending some love your way, right? And so, one second. So I just had to tell my brother he's in the back making noise. So it was healing and restorative to have these positive relationships that were different from the type that were had before. But I will say that, yeah, we built real relationships, right? So people from our community and their community went to each other's weddings, like their children's weddings, right? And we meet up for lunch, right? So that when pandemonium happens and chaos happens, as it will, because Allah says in the Quran, be sure that we will test you, right? With some form of loss, and I'm taking it out of order, but it's loss of lives and fruits of your labor. We're all going to get tested. And I don't remember if it was Muhammad Rami who mentioned that Allah, through the test, he raises our station, right? So we will be tested. So you need to make sure that you have these real authentic relationships, because it's the right thing to do, right? But even if you're operating from self-interest, you know that when your time comes to be tried and tested, you don't want people to turn their backs and say, well, you didn't come for us. And that was the reality that actually happened when I was trying to motivate some people in a particular Black Muslim community to be involved. And I don't remember which crisis the Muslims were dealing with at this particular point. And an older African-American imam said to me, and there was pain in his voice, where he said, when we were dealing with the effects of racism, and we were dealing with, after the civil rights movement, we were dealing with, and he gave a list of the things that he was like, we reached out to some of these communities in the late 70s and the 80s. And so now they had nothing for us. And so now it's hard for me to find the motivation to be concerned with their issues right now. You know, and it was a real talk conversation, but there was pain in his chest. So I mean, at least in his voice, from what I could gather it, in terms of like, we went through some real stuff. And, you know, a lot of us believe that Al-Islam is freedom, justice, and equality, and it makes you a universal ambassador. Like it gives you a universal passport. But then when you're told this is your brother and they're not supporting you in your time of suffering, just understand that the times will come when everyone else will need it. And you want those relationships, those authentic relationships, so that when someone needs to vouch for you, they would be able to vouch for you from a place of authenticity and be able to support you from a place of real investment and care and concern. So that's for me, allyship and coalition building in its best form is relationship, is the building of authentic relationships. And in its weakest form, it's just partnering with people on shared concerns and issues. And honestly, even if we did a better job of that, that would be a good place to start.
MashaAllah, that's a great answer, and may Allah bless you. I think it's something really important for. Again, it might be uncomfortable. We kept referring to this word. It might be a little uncomfortable. It might be new to it, but reaching out, building those relationships, making those calls, making those text messages. That's really the essence of what we as organizations or as individuals should be doing right now, or we should be doing in general. We really need to wrap up, and again, wonderful discussions, wonderful thoughts. I think we could go on for another 3 hours, but we don't want to do that. Particularly, mashallah, Ismahan came from a protest. Ndidi doing really a lot of work, and we're going to take care of your brother later on, and Muhammad, of course, busy as always. So some really great reflections. First, I want to thank everybody in the comment section. Ahmed, Shams, Yasha, really some great Omar, really great thoughts and reflections. We really appreciate y'all giving your insights. I urge anybody who's you're on your phone or on your laptop or something to read those comments, really insightful thoughts. So as we begin to close, we'd like to get in any last questions or things that we want to ask the panelists directly. I'd like each of the panelists to speak a little bit about, kind of conclude with the idea of what next, what now, what should I, sitting here as an executive team member or an MSA president or a board trustee, or what should I be thinking about right now for the next days, weeks, months ahead? I'll give this first to you, Ismahan. What is your message to them?
All right, alhamdulillah. I think my message is going to be brief, inshallah. Think about transformative relationships and transformative community building rather than transactional, especially current in this specific moment that we're in. And just thinking about how can we hold ourselves to the degree that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala holds us to, right? As Allah told the angels that he's creating vicegerents upon this earth. So the transformative kind of relationships is going to lead to the following things, inshallah: transparency, accountability, communication, not the tools of communication, but communication, connecting, and coordination and collaboration, subhanAllah. So as we're thinking about programs and as we're thinking about activities in our culture, we'll talk for hours if we have to go through the A through Z of how to do this. While there are amazing advice out there, it comes down to what kind of transformative relationships are you having in community and with community, and not from a place where we're kind of like lecturing folks or telling folks what to do. Yes, we set the vision, but how do folks see themselves as being part of that vision? Wallahu a'lam.
Jazakallah khair, Ismahan. Barakallah fiki. Muhammad.
So I want to just summarize everything that I learned from our two beloved dear sisters here and from our discussion, and putting it all together. I think a lot of people had a lot of different questions, looked at it from different angles. Ultimately, I want to say, one, it's about reflecting on me and my own biases. That's what it begins first, and knowing that I'm impacted by the systemic racism in the history of this country, and my institutions are impacted because we're part of the system. We're not in a vacuum. And then realizing that I might be holding certain ideas about the Black community and our Black congregants in our masjids and Black brothers and sisters. And then number two is setting up those task force to assess what needs to happen, assessing how have my organization, how have we contributed, because we didn't contribute, how did we actually add to the problem, and how were the Black brothers and sisters in my constituents, people that we serve, were impacted by our lack of care and concern, or even emphasis on these issues of justice, issues of systemic racism, and so doing that assessment. And then three, setting up whatever needs to be done, action item to work on these things, an action item of allyship and seeing how we can co-sponsor events, co-sponsor projects, co-sponsor initiatives in the scope that we have. For some organizations, it might not be possible because that's not your scope. And that's okay. I don't want every single Muslim organizations and institutions to become social justice institutions. We have a lot of different other needs. I mean, that's because that's not what we're saying here. Everyone has a scope. But looking at within my scope of my organization, my masjid, my MSA, my charity organization, what is my role in that, and what can we do to make sure we're not part of the problem, but we're part of the solution, or and we are contributing. Whether it be getting putting the pressure to get our community to engage and educate and awareness, standing up with our money and standing up with our energy and whatever it takes, and so being intentional about the initiatives that we take, and I think if we can do those three things, and I think inshallah we'll be at a good start. And it's better late than never, and I think it's a good start.
I love that. Always better late than never, especially when it comes to these kind of issues. Absolutely. Indeed, I don't have any questions.
I think I had something to add, I think.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Jump in, Ismahan.
Just one word: courage. That's it.
Absolutely, mashallah. Go ahead, Ndidi. Any last words? And I want every one of y'all to take some time out to tell the attendees where they can get access to you, where they can obviously follow you and get to know you a little bit. So we're going to take the time out for that. Nobody leave just yet. Ndidi, any final thoughts about what's next as a community leader or as an organization? What's next?
What's next is to start, is to act, is to build, is to assess, to research, to connect, and to build. I just want to kind of close with some of the points that I made, which is, I think someone else brought it up that sometimes people look at it like, oh, well, we need to help the Black people, and we need to help the Black people, and like they're unfortunate, they're less fortunate. And it's like, it's Black people who built this country. It's Black people who were wearing khimar from head to bottom all the way down in a time where the people were looking at Islam as something ajib. They never heard of it. You have Black people saying that they're becoming members of a foreign religion for all intents and purposes. You know what I'm saying? So it's not a point that, it's not even, at the very least, it's contributing back to those whose shoulders we stand on. But at the most, it is, it's just, it's not it's, I guess just a reminder about the fact that it's not just Allah calls us, whoever is the majority. And this happens wherever if it was the purple people were the majority and pink people were the minority, there would need to be a dispensation made so that the pink people had equal or equitable access to the same thing that the purple people had. It's just really, and that goes the same within Islam in America as well. So I want to kind of close with just some thoughts. There's MSA leaders and there are Islamic school teachers. You know, I'll give you an example of one Muslim girl who went to school, who went to college, and she went to an MSA, and she was African American, and she didn't feel like she had a voice. She didn't feel like she had a voice there. She didn't feel like there was a place for her. There wasn't any space that was created. She's one of very few folks there. She did not feel welcomed. She felt very ostracized. And when she tried to become active, she felt like she was rejected. So she withdrew. She withdrew and she built her own. She got involved more with the Black Student Association than the Muslim Student Association. There's nothing wrong with that, right? But she did. And so what happened is it came to pass that the Muslim Student Association was dealing with some Islamophobia and some real deep-seated racism. I can't remember what was going on politically, but racist supremacists started tagging things and really creating a hostile environment. And so it came a time where she had leadership with the Black Student Association. And the MSA was looking out like, hey, we're all minorities. Can you connect with us, right? And it was just like, so now it's like, now you need the support. So I say this to say that if it's not enough for me to, for us to call to people based on what the Quran says, then understand that will come a time when we all need each other. And you don't want to be in a deficit. But in the end, Allah's control is over everything. And, you know, the Black community is going to succeed either way, if it's in Allah's will, period. You know, and inshallah, people will join us, and we'll all be, inshallah, working towards our goals together. And then, yeah, I dropped some in the chat. I dropped some immediate resources. Oh, I just want to say, this conversation, we're focusing on Black lives, right? All houses are important, yes, but we need to give our attention to the house that's on fire. That's where we need to give our water to, right? So right now we're talking about Black lives, but when we're talking about inclusivity and representation, we also need to know that that includes disabled members of the community. That includes Shia members of the Muslim community, right? And any other folks, like I attended a Friday reflection led by Brother Saeed Rizvi. And he is a blind Muslim who is the Pakistani Shia Muslim. So he's like a triple minority, right? And he was explaining his experience being just not having access or equity in education because things were not accommodated to him. And I'll give you an example. Everyone, if you're right-handed, raise your hand. If you're left-handed, raise your hand. Okay, now I want you to think of the spaces that you've been in where there was accommodation for the fact that everyone didn't raise their hand when we said right-handed. So there's so many ways that we don't think about our responsibility of making sure that there's a voice. But I assure you, when the time comes, we're going to need every single voice. So use a task force, focus on Black lives. When that fire is out, let's go to the other lives that are affected, that are not accommodated. We will be held to account, if not in this life, in the hereafter. I hope that my words of benefit, and thank you.
Jazakallah khair, Ndidi, barakallah fiki. Jazakallah khair for those amazing references. I urge people to take them out of the chat or to note them, save them somewhere. Ndidi, your website is where people can contact you. If you want to look it up, Ndidi Okakpu, you can. She does some amazing work, and you get contact with her. Anywhere else that they should go, Ndidi?
So it's Okakpu.com. That's Nokakpu. And then online and social media, my handle is Ndidi Writes. NDIDIWRITES. And that's across all platforms.
For any mental health professionals or anyone who's interested in that angle, recently I posted a few resources for folks who are serving that capacity, whether it be from social worker to caseworkers to masjid, youth mentors. On I think on my Facebook, I believe because I think we have to research our history and you have to research the impact of when you read, when you watch, then you get to kind of see, that we're standing on the shoulders of the giants of the sacrifice that the Black community made, and us, the immigrant community. We wouldn't have any of these, even the laws that we stand on, and then we don't know how it impacts, the systemic racism, how it impacts the families, and you wouldn't know that until you're learning to intentionally learning, engaging, and so forth. And so definitely reading, watching, listening is definitely a good start. And so I think I did drop some few suggestions that I got from few individuals that I trust, and those are really good resources. So you could definitely check it out on Facebook. I think we can post it we can probably share it on the Oaktree page as well. And Sister Ndidi also has some stuff. So I think we can all, perhaps afterwards we can post all these.
Yeah, if we can do it like an executive summary of the points, and then also resources, and
it would be great for everybody here.
I can make it available. We can make it available to you guys, and then if you want to post on the website for other people to have access to it.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Mohammad Hasan on Facebook and Instagram.
It's Hasan Psychology on my handles, but again, I don't have too many content on this. I think I would direct people to check out Sister Ndidi's and Sister Ismahan and what they have shared.
And Ismahan, where I know it's been a crazy time, mashallah. Sister Ismahan was coming from, she texted me around 30 minutes before it started. Hey, just got back from a protest. Mashallah, may Allah bless your work. Where should people get in contact with you if they want to follow up with you, or kind of bring you in the work you're doing with PACE?
Absolutely. So I'll put my social media is Ismahan Abdullahi, mainly Twitter and Facebook and Insta, and then as well as masspace.org, especially for a lot of the actions that we have towards the Muslim community. So I'll put that in the chat right here. But Ismahan Abdullahi, and then Twitter is Ismahan _M_A.
Jazakallah khairan, barakallah fiki. And I really, really want to thank everybody here. Thank all the attendees. I don't have enough time to do I had a bit of a presentation that I wanted to share, but I won't have time for it. But I do encourage everybody here to reach out to us at Oaktree Institute. We're definitely, we know our limitations, particularly when in certain subjects like this, but there are certain skills that I think all community leaders or nonprofit leaders, they need, whether it's around management or communication or how to structure organizations. And of course, that's our main focus as an entity. Our organization focuses on leadership and organizational development, how to improve the mechanisms, the structures, the management, the people, the processes of your organization. And so if there's anything y'all need from that end, of course, particular kinds of, we've done before trainings around what does it mean to lead inclusive teams? What does it mean to communicate in an empathetic way? What does active listening mean? These are all skills that we teach on, and I think they're more crucial than ever now. And if anybody does need to reach out to us, please feel free to do so. OaktreeInstitute.org, of course, our website, across all the platforms. Reach out to us, inshallah, and we hope that we can create these kind of conversations. And actually, we are. I'll kind of end by saying we hope to create this kind of momentum, keep these kind of conversations going. So we're starting next Monday, every Monday evening at 9 p.m. on our Facebook Live and hopefully at least our Facebook Live, conversations for community leaders around topics just like this that no one's addressing for our community leaders, our nonprofit leaders. So we inshallah are going to make a weekly episode, a weekly show similar to this webinar where we discuss really important topics affecting our community and what community leaders and organizers should know about how to solve those issues, those problems. Look out for that. We'll be marketing that inshallah across our platforms as well. And inshallah we'll get this recording out across the platforms as well. I want to thank Ndidi and Muhammad and Ismahan. Ask Allah to bless all of you. Ask Allah to allow us to put these things into action, to allow us to be to allow us to be of those that bring the change that we wish to see, to allow us to be those that bring the influence and the true message that Allah wants on this earth, and bringing justice to all and peace to all, and allowing us to carry the responsibility. It's a tremendous mantle. I think we mentioned this when we were, Muhammad, remember when we were doing COVID trainings around what to do now in crisis. No board of trustee member, most community leaders were not asked, Like they weren't prepared to deal with the pandemic and to deal with, how to deal with, movements of social justice. A lot of them were not, a lot of our communities, unfortunately, not trained on how to do these things. And so we definitely want to empathize with them, but ignorance is not an excuse, right? You cannot just live life and say, well, nobody taught us, nobody trained us, we didn't learn. And I hope, inshallah ta'ala, and pray that what we were empowered with today can really allow us to be means and beacons of justice for Allah Azza wa Jal in our personal lives and in the work that we're doing in our communities. Barakallahu feekum, everybody. Jazakumullah khair to our attendees again. Jazakumullah khair to our panelists. We ask Allah to bless everyone, and we hope to see y'all very, very soon. Engage with us, interact with us. Barakallahu feekum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.